Hey my friends, how are you feeling tonight? Tonight, we're not just stepping back in time, we're setting sail, drifting out onto the vast, star-dusted expanse of the Pacific Ocean, long before GPS, before compasses as you know them, before even a handy weather app, to tell you if that suspiciously dark cloud on the horizon is bringing a bit of a tantrum or just some gentle cooling rain. You're on the shores of a lush, volcanic island, the air thick with the scent of hibiscus, roasting taro, and the salty tang of the ocean that stretches seemingly infinitely in every direction. Your massive, double-hulled canoe, the kaulua, is almost ready, a testament to incredible craftsmanship and even more incredible courage. Honestly, if you were suddenly put in charge of navigating this thing with nothing but the stars, the swells, and a very hopeful look on your face, you probably wouldn't just miss your destination. You'd likely invent a whole new continent by accident, probably somewhere near Antarctica, and wonder why the coconuts taste so icy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your gentle click of approval is like a favorable wind in our sails. And while you're at it, please do drop a comment letting us know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always a quiet joy to see how far these sleepy voyages reach. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is alive with a quiet hum of anticipation, a different energy than the usual village rhythm. The rhythmic thump of tapa cloth being beaten, the laughter of children playing near the lagoon. These familiar sounds are underscored by a deeper thrum of purpose. Your journey is not a whim. It's a monumental undertaking whispered about for moons planned with meticulous care by the elders and the master navigator, the Pidbalayo of Palu, whose eyes seem to hold the wisdom of the ocean itself. You feel it in your bones, this call to the sea. Perhaps your island home has grown a little too crowded, the fertile lands not quite stretching as far as they used to. Or maybe it's the lure of the unknown, the whispered legends of islands hidden beyond the horizon, waiting to be discovered, waiting for new life. Or let's be honest, maybe someone important just got really tired of their noisy neighbors and decided a few thousand miles of open ocean would make for excellent soundproofing. The vast Pacific beckons a shimmering, shifting canvas of blues and grays, stretching further than your mind can truly comprehend. It's not an empty void to you, though. It's a highway, a network of paths, known to those who can read its subtle signs. The flight of birds, the patterns of the waves, the colors of the water, and of course the eternal dance of the stars. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Polynesian navigators were arguably the greatest explorers in human history, intentionally sailing across and settling thousands of square miles of the Pacific Ocean from Hawaii in the north to Aotearoa, New Zealand in the south, and Rapa Nui, Easter Island in the east, all in open canoes, often against prevailing winds and currents. They weren't just drifting aimlessly. They were executing precise planned voyages of discovery and colonization. You watch as the final preparations are made. The great canoe, its twin hulls carved from massive tree trunks, is being loaded. But this section isn't about the cargo just yet. We'll get to the nitty-gritty of what they packed, from the last yam to the most seasick chicken, in the segments to come. This moment is about the feeling. The weight of what's about to happen settles upon you, a mixture of excitement, deep apprehension, and a profound sense of duty. You are carrying not just your own life, but the future of your lineage, the stories of your ancestors, and the hopes of your community. No pressure, right? Just finding a tiny speck of land in an ocean that covers nearly a third of the planet. Easy peasy. There are rituals being performed, quiet chants to the gods of the sea, and sky offerings made to ensure a safe passage. The master navigator consults his mental maps, perhaps tracing lines on the sand with a stick, visualizing the journey ahead, aligning the departure with favorable omens. One quirky, or perhaps deeply spiritual tidbit is the belief held by some Polynesian cultures that certain sharks, particularly the great hammerhead, were considered aumakua, or ancestral guardian spirits. Sighting one at the start of a voyage could be seen as a powerful and protective omen, a sign that the ancestors were watching over the journey. Of course, if one tried to take a bite out of your canoe, that was probably less of a good omen and more of an immediate canoe repair situation. Historians still argue whether the primary impetus for these vast migrations was driven by a spirit of adventure and exploration, resource depletion on home islands, forcing outward expansion, or sometimes political turmoil and the need for defeated groups to find new homes. It was likely a complex interplay of all these factors, varying from voyage to voyage, island to island. For you standing on the shore, the why might be less important than the how and the what if. What if the winds turn? What if the stars are obscured for too many nights? What if the island you seek is just a legend? These are the thoughts that flicker at the edge of your resolve, quickly pushed aside by the navigator's calm confidence and the shared purpose of your fellow voyagers. The scent of wood smoke from the village fires mingles with the fresh, briny air. You can hear the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore, a constant rhythm that will soon be replaced by the deeper creak and groan of the canoe moving through open ocean swells. The moment of departure is drawing near. You take one last long look at the familiar green slopes of your island, committing every detail to memory. This sight, this smell, this feeling, it will have to sustain you across countless miles of blue. The journey ahead is not just across water, but across time into the unknown. The vast Pacific is waiting, and you're about to get your feet very, very wet. Now let's talk about your ride. This isn't some flimsy little dinghy you're about to hop into. The vessel carrying you across these immense stretches of ocean is a marvel of Stone Age engineering, a testament to generations of accumulated knowledge and skill. The Polynesian voyaging canoe, or kaulua in Hawaiian. Similar terms exist across Polynesia, like vaka katea or alia. This isn't just a boat. For the duration of your journey, which could last weeks or even months, this great wa is your entire world, your island arc. Imagine two long, sleek hulls, often carved from massive single tree trunks, like koa or breadfruit, or sometimes constructed from carefully fitted planks. These hulls are typically deep and narrow, designed to cut through the water with minimal resistance. They are not identical. Often one hull, the windward or ama side, might be slightly smaller or shaped differently from the leeward or KL side, a subtle asymmetry that aids in steering and stability. Connecting these two hulls are several strong crossbeams known as yako in Hawaiian. These are lashed incredibly securely to the hulls, using miles of hand-braided cordage, usually made from coconut husk fibers, senit, a material renowned for its strength and resistance to salt water. The flexibility of these lashings is key. It allows the canoe to flex and absorb the stresses of the open ocean rather than rigidly resisting and breaking. It's like an ancient shock absorption system, except instead of springs, you have really well-tied knots. If your canoe starts sounding like a rusty door hinge, you might want to check those lashings. Atop these crossbeams sits a central platform or deck, often made of lighter wood planks. This is your living space, your working area, and your storage hold. It might have a low railing or gunwale around the edges for a little security, but falling overboard is still a phrase you'd rather not experience firsthand. On this platform, there's usually a sheltered area, a kind of hut or cabin hail or pupa, often covered with woven pandanus mats or tapa cloth. This provides some protection from the relentless sun, the driving rain, and the ocean spray. It's where you might sleep huddled during storms and protect your most precious cargo, like delicate plants or the navigator's sacred tools. Don't expect en-suite facilities though. The facilities are generally over the side and hopefully downwind. The canoe is propelled by one or more large triangular or crab claw shaped sails woven from pandanus leaves. These sails are remarkably efficient, capable of sailing close to the wind. The mast or masts are also made of sturdy wood, and the rigging, like the hull lashings, is all senit cordage. Handling these sails requires skill and coordination from the crew, trimming them to catch the wind, raising and lowering them as conditions change. It's a constant dance with the elements. You become intimately familiar with the song of the wind in the rigging, the creak of the mast, the snap of the sail as it fills. A mainstream historical fact is that these Polynesian voyaging canoes could be truly enormous, some reaching lengths of 60 to 100 feet or even more. They were capable of carrying dozens of people along with provisions, plants, and animals for voyages covering thousands of miles. The sheer scale of these vessels, built without metal tools, using only stone adzes, chisels made of shell or bone, and fire for hollowing and shaping, is astounding. The replica voyaging canoe, Hokulea, which has successfully navigated vast Pacific routes using traditional methods, is a testament to the ingenuity of these ancient designs. Steering is primarily done with a large steering paddle or sweep a long, heavy oar, usually operated from the stern of one of the hulls. It takes strength and skill to keep the canoe on course, especially in rough seas. The navigator, of course, dictates the course, but the crew provides the muscle. Sometimes, depending on the design, there might be dagger boards or a central keel-like structure that can be raised or lowered to improve tracking and reduce leeway. One quirky, or rather ingenious feature of some Polynesian canoes was the bailer. Despite the best efforts at construction and maintenance, canoes will inevitably take on some water from spray rain or minor leaks. Bailers were essential tools, often beautifully carved wooden scoops used to continuously remove this water. It was a constant, unglamorous, but vital task. Imagine your job title, Chief Executive Bailer. It sounds important until you realize you're just the one with the perpetually wet knees. Historians still argue about the exact speeds these voyaging canoes could achieve and maintain over long distances. Estimates vary, but under favorable conditions they could likely average 4 to 6 knots nautical miles per hour and perhaps more in bursts. This might not sound fast by modern standards, but it was perfectly adequate for covering the vast distances between islands, especially when coupled with the navigator's extraordinary ability to find their way. The debate also extends to the carrying capacity. Just how much food, water, and living cargo could they realistically transport for a multi-week voyage aimed at establishing a new settlement? It's a complex equation of weight, space, and human endurance. This wire, then, is far more than just wood and rope. It's a living entity, in a way, a carefully balanced ecosystem carrying the seeds of a new community. Every creak of its timbers, every slap of a wave against its hulls is a reminder of your utter dependence on its integrity and the skill of those who built and sail it. It's your home, your transport, and your lifeline all rolled into one magnificent, slightly damp, ocean-going package. You treat it with respect, listen to its needs, and trust it to carry you to that unseen horizon. Now that you're settled on your magnificent wa'a, gliding across the seemingly endless blue, let's consider one of the most critical life or death provisions. You've packed fresh water. On a long ocean voyage with no guarantee of rainfall and surrounded by an undrinkable ocean, securing and rationing fresh water is paramount. Dehydration is a swift and unforgiving enemy, and running out of water far from land means almost certain doom. So how did Polynesian navigators ensure their crews stayed hydrated on journeys that could last for weeks, even months? The primary method of carrying fresh water was in gourds. Large mature gourds, often from the Lagenaria siceraria, vine the same species used for calabashes and containers worldwide, were hollowed out, dried, and carefully sealed, often with wooden stoppers and resin. These gourds varied in size, some capable of holding several gallons. Dozens, even hundreds of these water-filled gourds would be stored carefully within the hulls or on the central platform of the canoe, protected from breakage and excessive heat. They were in essence your ancient canteens, your Nalgene bottles of the Neolithic Pacific. You'd probably want to label them clearly drinking water, not for seasick chickens. Another important source of water storage was bamboo. Thick lengths of bamboo with their natural internal compartments could be filled with water and sealed at the ends. Bamboo is strong, relatively lightweight, and readily available on many Pacific islands. A bundle of water-filled bamboo stalks would be another vital part of your hydration strategy. It's like nature's own pre-packaged water tubes. Collecting rainwater at sea was also a crucial practice. The large sloping surfaces of the pandanus mat sails were ideal for catching rain. Channels made from split bamboo or specially shaped wooden troughs would be positioned to direct the runoff from the sails into empty gourds or other containers. Of course, this depended on the weather actually cooperating and providing rain. During a prolonged dry spell, anxiety about water supplies would have mounted daily. You'd be watching the sky with an intensity usually reserved for spotting land. Every dark cloud becomes a potential lifesaver. A mainstream historical fact is that Polynesian voyagers were acutely aware of the need for water conservation. Strict rationing would have been enforced by the navigator or a designated elder. Each person would receive a carefully measured daily allowance, just enough to sustain life. There was no room for waste. Even the water used for cooking, if any, would be carefully considered. This discipline was essential for survival. Now for a slightly quirky, though perhaps less reliable source of hydration, certain types of fish. The flesh of some freshly caught ocean fish contains a surprising amount of moisture. In extreme circumstances, consuming raw fish or squeezing the liquid from its flesh could provide a small amount of hydration. And I must stress, this is not to be confused with drinking seawater, which is a definite no-no. The body fluids of turtles, if caught, could also offer some hydration. It's not exactly a refreshing glass of spring water, more like survival sushi surprise. But when you're desperate, you adapt. It's probably not something you'd order from a menu, but it beats the alternative. Historians still argue about the exact quantities of water carried on these voyages and the typical rationing amounts. Given the variations in canoe size, crew numbers, anticipated voyage length, and the unpredictability of rainfall, it's difficult to establish a precise standard. Some scholars suggest that navigators might have also targeted routes or seasons known for more frequent rainfall, if possible. The capacity to carry enough water for, say, 30 people for 30 days without resupply is a significant logistical challenge, and it underscores the incredible planning and forethought involved in these expeditions. Were they also able to desalinate seawater in any rudimentary way? The general consensus is no, not effectively enough for survival, making fresh water sources utterly critical. The placement of the water gourds on the canoe was also important. They needed to be accessible but also secure, preventing them from rolling around or being damaged in rough seas. They would likely be stored in the coolest part of the canoe, perhaps low in the hulls, to minimize evaporation and keep the water as fresh as possible. Every drop was precious. The sound of water sloshing in a gourd was the sound of life. An empty gourd, on the other hand, was a sound of rising fear. You learn to sip, not gulp, to make every mouthful last. You become intensely aware of your body's need for water, of the dryness in your throat, the thickness of your tongue. The navigator watching his crew would be constantly assessing their condition, making the hard decisions about when and how much water to distribute. The responsibility must have been immense. Sometimes you might even encounter a fresh water lens at sea after heavy rain. This is where a layer of fresh rainwater temporarily floats on top of the denser salt water. If conditions were calm enough, it was sometimes possible to carefully skim this fresh water from the ocean surface. It's a rare and welcome bonus, a gift from the sky and sea. So as you drift under the hot Pacific sun, the gourd of water beside you is more than just a drink. It's a lifeline, a carefully hoarded treasure, a testament to the ingenuity and discipline of your people. Every sip is a prayer for more rain and for land to appear before the last gourd runs dry. With your hydration hopefully sorted, thanks to those precious gourds and the occasional cooperative rain cloud, let's turn our attention to your stomach. What kind of food supplies are you bringing on this epic trans-Pacific picnic? You can't exactly trail a fishing line for weeks on end and hope for the best, especially if you're aiming to establish a new colony with dozens of people. You need reliable, long-lasting provisions. Polynesian voyagers were masters of food preservation, carrying a surprising variety of dried, fermented, and specially prepared foods designed to sustain them for the long haul. A cornerstone of the voyaging diet was starchy staples that could be processed for longevity. Breadfruit, ulu, in Hawaiian mei, in Tahitian, was a key player. Ripe breadfruit could be cooked mashed and then fermented in leaf-lined pits in the ground before the voyage. This fermented breadfruit paste, known as poi, in some contexts, though usually associated with taro or similar preparations like masi in Samoa or ema in the Marquesas, could last for months, even years, if properly prepared and stored. It was dense, nutritious, and let's be honest, probably an acquired taste, likely a bit sour and pasty. But it was calories, and calories were king on the open ocean. You'd scoop it out with your fingers, a compact, if not gourmet fuel source. Think of it as ancient astronaut food, but with more tang. Tarokalo in Hawaiian was another vital root crop. Like breadfruit, it could be cooked, pounded into a paste. The classic Hawaiian poi is made this way and sometimes fermented or dried for storage. Taro cones themselves, if kept dry, could also last for a reasonable period. Sweet potatoes, uala, in Hawaiian kumara, in Maori, were also incredibly important, especially in later Polynesian migrations. These could be cooked and dried or carried as raw tubers, which have a decent shelf life if stored correctly. These starchy foods provided the bulk of the carbohydrates needed for energy during the arduous voyage. Coconuts NIU were an all-purpose miracle food. The mature coconut meat could be eaten fresh or dried copra for a long-lasting, high-fat, high-calorie food. Dried coconut flakes would have been a lightweight and energy-dense snack. And of course, the coconut water from younger green coconuts provided hydration and electrolytes, though this was more of a fresh off-the-tree item and less of a long-term storage solution for water compared to gourds. Still, any coconuts brought along would be a valuable multi-purpose resource. You could probably write a whole separate sleepy history on the humble yet mighty coconut and its 101 uses for not dying at sea. Dried fish and meat were also packed. Fish caught in abundance before departure would be sun-dried or smoked to preserve them. This dried fish, malawo, was a good source of protein. If pigs or chickens were being transported more on them later, some might be slaughtered and preserved before setting sail, though carrying live animals was generally preferred for establishing new breeding populations. The preservation techniques were simple but effective: salt, if available from coastal salt pan sun and smoke. The resulting product would be chewy, salty, and intensely flavored, but it wouldn't spoil quickly. Pandanus fruit hala in Hawaiian was another interesting provision. The fleshy keys of the pandanus fruit could be eaten raw or cooked, and the starchy floury pulp could be dried and made into a kind of long-lasting cake or flour. These pandanus flour cakes were a portable and durable food source. The flavor is described as somewhat nutty or like an artichoke, depending on the variety. It probably wasn't winning any Michelin stars, but it filled a hole. A mainstream historical fact is that the ability to preserve and transport these staple crops was fundamental to Polynesian expansion. Without these portable food technologies, the settlement of remote island groups across the Pacific would have been impossible. They weren't just packing snacks, they were packing the foundations of a new agricultural society. One quirky or perhaps highly practical food item mentioned in some traditions is the candle nut kukui in Hawaiian. While primarily known for its oily nuts that could be burned for light, hence the name, the roasted kernel of the candle nut was also sometimes eaten, albeit in moderation, as it can have a laxative effect. Perhaps it was considered a multi-purpose item, a tiny snack and a tiny lamp, all in one. Or maybe it was just for those times when you really needed things to get moving after a diet of dried everything. Feeling a bit stuck? Have a kukui nut. Historians still argue about the exact balance of these preserved foods versus reliance on fresh fishing during voyages. While fishing was undoubtedly practiced, we'll get to the gear, it couldn't be the sole source of sustenance, especially for large groups or during periods of bad weather. The preserved plant foods likely formed the core of the diet, supplemented by fresh catches when possible. The sheer logistics of preparing and stowing enough fermented breadfruit paste or dried sweet potato for dozens of people for many weeks is mind-boggling, requiring immense communal effort before departure. These provisions would be carefully stored in woven baskets, gourds, or wooden containers kept as dry as possible in the canoe's hulls or the sheltered platform area. Rationing would be strict, ensuring the supplies lasted for the anticipated duration of the voyage with a margin for delays. The taste and texture might have become monotonous after a while, but every mouthful was a step closer to land a morsel of survival. You'd probably dream of fresh fruit and roasted pork, but the dense, slightly sour taste of fermented breadfruit was the taste of hope. Beyond the foods packed for immediate consumption on the voyage, your wā is also a floating Noah's Ark of botany, a precious living cargo of canoe plants. These are the essential plants carefully selected and transported as cuttings, tuber seeds, or young saplings that you and your fellow voyagers are bringing to establish agriculture and sustain life on whatever new island you discover. Without these, even if you find a fertile paradise, you might struggle to thrive in the long term. These plants are your future. The selection of canoe plants was not random. It was a curated collection of the most vital species for food, medicine, fiber, and construction. These were the plants that formed the backbone of Polynesian horticulture and material culture. You are essentially carrying a starter kit for a new ecosystem. Taro kalo, or Colocasia esculenta, is a prime example. You'd be carrying taro combs, specifically the top portion of the comb, with the leaf stalks attached, known as huli. These are remarkably resilient and can be replanted to grow new taro plants. Given taro's importance as a staple food, providing a reliable source of carbohydrates, ensuring its successful transport and cultivation was a top priority. You'd probably have dozens, if not hundreds, of these huli carefully bundled and kept moist, perhaps wrapped in leaves or moss. Sweet potato, uala or ipomoea patatas, is another star of the canoe plant lineup. Slips or cuttings of sweet potato vines or the tubers themselves would be transported. The sweet potato was particularly significant because it could thrive in a wider range of conditions than some other tropical staples and was crucial for settlement in cooler, more southerly islands like Aotearoa. Its presence across Polynesia, originating from South America, is a testament to incredible transoceanic contact and exchange, a mainstream historical fact that continues to fascinate researchers. How exactly it spread is still debated, but its importance is undeniable. Breadfruit ulu, or Artocarpus altilis, saplings or root cuttings would also be on board. Growing a breadfruit tree takes time, but its prolific starchy fruits are a massive boon to any community. These young plants would need careful protection from salt spray and drying winds. Imagine tending to a tiny seasick breadfruit sapling in the middle of the Pacific. It's like being a very specific, very worried plant parent. Banana maya or musa species suckers or corms were also common passengers. Bananas provide fruit, and their leaves have myriad uses from cooking wrappers to temporary roofing. Several varieties would likely be carried to ensure a diverse and resilient crop. Sugarcane or Saccharum officinarum was transported as sections of stock. Not just for a bit of sweetness, sugarcane was also an important source of easily digestible energy, and its fibers could be used for other purposes. Chewing on a piece of fresh sugarcane would have been a welcome treat during the voyage, a small burst of sweetness amidst the salty air. Paper mulberry walkie or Brusonetia papyrifera was not for eating, but it was absolutely vital for making tapa cloth, the bark cloth used for clothing, bedding, and ceremonial purposes. Cuttings of walker would be carefully nurtured, as establishing a source of this fiber was crucial for daily life and cultural practices. You can't exactly show up to your new island home and expect a department store to be open. Other important canoe plants included gourds, Ipaea or Lagenaria, Siceraria for containers and musical instruments. You'd carry seed-stiacic plant kaulua or Cordyline fruticosa for its edible roots, spiritually significant leaves used in rituals and for wrapping food, and various medicinal plants, which we'll touch on later. Mountain apple, Ohia, Aie or Syzygium malacense, and candlenut kukui or Alerites molucanus were also frequent voyagers carried as seeds or saplings. One quirky, or perhaps just incredibly far-sighted aspect of transporting these plants was the understanding that they often relied on specific soil conditions or even symbiotic relationships. While they couldn't exactly pack bags of their home island soil, a bit heavy for a canoe, the very act of wrapping roots and cuttings in organic material and the presence of animals and their manure on board might have inadvertently helped transport beneficial microbes and nutrients to give the plants a head start in their new environment. It's like a little inoculation of home. Historians still argue about the exact list of plants transported on every single voyage, as it likely varied, depending on the origin island, the intended destination if known, and the specific traditions of the voyaging group. Some plants might have been more critical for certain island environments than others. The archaeological and botanical evidence combined with oral traditions helps piece together this floating botanical inventory. The successful establishment of these plants was a make or break factor for new settlements. If your taro crop failed, your future looked pretty bleak. These precious plants would be housed in specially constructed compartments on the canoe deck or carefully stowed in the hulls, shielded from the worst of the elements. They would be watered sparingly with fresh water, another demand on that precious resource, and tended to by designated caretakers. Their survival was as important as the survival of the human passengers. They represented food security, clothing, shelter, medicine, and cultural continuity. They were the green heart of the voyage, a promise of land and life blooming anew in some distant, unknown corner of the vast ocean. Each unfurling leaf during the journey would be a tiny symbol of hope. Alongside the human voyagers and the carefully tended canoe plants, your wa'a is also carrying another vital, if sometimes noisy and smelly type of cargo livestock. These four-legged and two-winged passengers weren't just coming along for the ride. They were essential for establishing a sustainable food source and contributing to the agricultural cycle in any new land you might settle. Polynesian navigators typically transported a select trio of domesticated animals, pigs, dogs, and chickens. Pigs pua'a in Hawaiian were highly prized. They are efficient converters of food scraps into protein, reproduce relatively quickly, and the meat was a significant part of feasting and ceremonial life in many Polynesian societies. You'd be transporting young breeding pairs carefully selected for their hardiness. Imagine trying to keep a couple of seasick pigs calm on a rolling canoe deck. It probably wasn't the most relaxing part of the journey. They would be confined in pens or tethered likely on the main platform and fed with food scraps, leftover poi, or specially grown fodder. Their presence meant the promise of future pork roasts, which after weeks of dried fish would have sounded like heavenly music, though the actual sound of the pigs was probably less heavenly and more oinky. Dogs, ilio in Hawaiian, were also common voyagers. The Polynesian dog known as kure in Maori was a distinct breed often described as small to medium-sized with short legs and an often foxy appearance. While they may have served as companions and even sometimes as watchdogs, their primary role in many Polynesian societies, particularly during long voyages or in early settlement phases, was as a food source. Dog meat was consumed in many parts of Polynesia, and these dogs were specifically bred for this purpose. It's a challenging concept for many modern dog-loving cultures, but it was a practical reality of survival in a resource-scarce environment. Like the pigs, they would be transported as breeding stock. They probably also helped keep the rat population, unwanted stowaways on the canoe, somewhat in check, though perhaps not very efficiently if they were also on the menu. Good boy, Fido. You've caught a rat. Now about dinner. Chickens, more in Hawaiian, were the third member of this traveling menagerie. Polynesian chickens were typically smaller and hardier than many modern breeds. They provided eggs, a precious source of fresh protein during the voyage, if they were laying, and eventually meat. They are relatively easy to transport, requiring less space and food than pigs. They will be kept in coops or baskets, probably clucking and squawking their way across the Pacific, adding their particular soundtrack to the voyage. You'd have to ensure their coops were secure. A chicken overboard is a very sad and very unaerodynamic situation. A mainstream historical fact is that these three animals, pig, dog, and chicken, formed a transportable landscape or portable economy that accompanied Polynesian settlers across the Pacific. Their successful introduction was crucial for recreating familiar subsistence patterns and social structures on newly discovered islands. Archaeologists can trace the spread of Polynesian migration by identifying the bones of these animals in ancient settlement sites. The logistics of caring for these animals on a long canoe voyage were considerable. They needed food and fresh water, both of which were precious and strictly rationed for the human crew. Their waste had to be managed to maintain some level of hygiene on the crowded canoe deck. Not an easy task in rolling seas. They also had to be protected from the elements, particularly excessive sun or storms. It was a significant investment of resources and effort, underscoring their immense value to the voyagers. One quirky, or perhaps just sensible consideration when transporting these animals would have been their temperament. You'd want to select breeding animals that were relatively calm and manageable. A particularly aggressive boar or a constantly yapping dog would make an already challenging voyage even more stressful for everyone on board. Perhaps they had ancient Good Animal Voyager awards. This pig Kuniuniu wins most stoic swine of the voyage for not eating the navigator's charts. Historians still argue about the relative importance and prevalence of each of these animals in different parts of Polynesia and on different voyages. For example, dogs seem to have been more significant in some regions like New Zealand, where they were the only domesticated mammal until European contact, than in others. The specific mix of animals transported might have depended on the resources of the home island and the perceived needs of a new colony. Were there ever voyages with only chickens or only pigs? It's possible, depending on the circumstances. The presence of these animals also had ecological implications for any newly discovered islands. The introduction of pigs, which can be destructive foragers, and even dogs and chickens could impact native flora and fauna, particularly ground-nesting birds or vulnerable plants. This is an aspect of Polynesian settlement that modern ecologists study with great interest. For you on the Wa'a, these animals are more than just future meals or breeding stock. They are a living link to your ancestral lands, a tangible promise of continuity. The familiar sounds and smells they bring, however challenging to manage in confined quarters, are a small piece of home that you carry with you across the vast empty ocean. The contented grunt of a pig or the crow of a rooster at dawn, even if dawn is just another watery horizon, might be a surprisingly comforting sound in the immense solitude of the Pacific. They are fellow voyagers, sharing the risks and the hopes of the journey, while your carefully preserved stores of fermented breadfruit, dried sweet potato, and salted fish form the backbone of your voyaging diet. You can't rely solely on packed lunches for a multi-week trip across the open ocean. Supplementing these provisions with fresh protein from the sea is crucial not just for nutrition, but also for morale. A freshly caught fish after days of chewy preserved rations would be a welcome feast. Therefore, an essential part of your packed kit is a sophisticated array of fishing equipment perfectly adapted for oceanic angling from a moving canoe. The Polynesian fishing toolkit was a marvel of ingenuity crafted entirely from natural materials. Fish hooks mako in Hawaiian were particularly remarkable. They were made from a variety of materials, including bone, human pig or dog shell, pearl shell, turbo shell, turtle shell, and hardwoods. The designs varied greatly, depending on the type of fish being targeted and the specific fishing technique. Some were simple J-hooks, while others were elaborate two-piece trolling lures designed to mimic small fish or squid. The craftsmanship involved in shaping these hooks, often without metal tools, using only stone files and drills, was extraordinary. Each hook was a small work of art, perfectly balanced and lethally effective. You'd have a selection of these hooks, carefully stored, perhaps wrapped in tapa cloth, or in a small woven pandanus basket, ready for action. Fishing lines aho were typically made from hand-braided olona fiber, Tachardia latifolia, a plant renowned throughout Polynesia for producing cordage of exceptional strength, fineness, and resistance to salt water. Preparing olona line was a laborious process involving scraping the bark, extracting the fibers, and then painstakingly twisting and braiding them into various thicknesses. The resulting lines were incredibly strong, some capable of holding fish weighing hundreds of pounds, yet supple enough for casting and trolling. You'd have coils of this precious line, a vital link between you and your next meal. A snapped line wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a significant loss of a valuable tool. You'd probably mourn a lost high-quality hook more than some of your less helpful crewmates. Trolling was a common method for catching pelagic open ocean fish like tuna ahi bonito aku and mahi 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 mahi. This involved dragging a lure behind the moving canoe. Polynesian trolling lures were often beautiful and highly effective. A typical design featured a shank made of pearl shell which shimmered enticingly in the water, sometimes with additional features like feather hackles or boar bristles to create movement and further attract predatory fish. The hook itself would be cleverly integrated into the lure. Watching these lures skip and dart in the canoe's wake, waiting for that sudden powerful strike, would have been a tense and exciting part of the daily routine. For bottom fishing, if the canoe was in shallower waters, perhaps near an atoll or reef encountered mid-voyage, or as land was approached, heavier hooks and lines would be used sometimes with stone sinkers to take the baited hook down to the seabed. Bait could be smaller fish pieces of crab or even some of your less appealing dried rations if you were getting desperate. Anyone for day-old fermented breadfruit bait, know the fish might like it. Netsupena of various sizes might also have been carried, though large-scale netting was more suited to near-shore fishing than open ocean voyaging from a canoe. Smaller scoop nets could be useful for landing fish brought alongside or for catching flying fish that sometimes landed on the canoe deck at night, a welcome, if somewhat surprising delivery service. A mainstream historical fact is that Polynesian societies possessed an incredibly detailed knowledge of fish behavior, marine environments, and fishing techniques, all passed down through oral traditions. This Aikai knowledge of the sea included understanding lunar cycles and their effect on fish feeding patterns, the preferred habitats of different species, and the most effective ways to catch them. This wasn't just casual angling. It was a science. One quirky, or rather ingenious fishing implement sometimes used was a fish snare or noose, often made from strong olona cordage. These could be used in certain situations to slip over the head or tail of a docile or cornered fish, particularly in calmer waters or reef environments. It required a steady hand and a good understanding of fish behavior. Imagine trying to lasso a grumpy parrotfish. It would be quite the rodeo. Historians still argue about the relative contribution of fishing to the overall caloric intake during long migration voyages versus settlement voyages. For pioneering voyages into unknown waters where the duration was uncertain, the ability to fish successfully would have been critically important for survival. For shorter established routes, perhaps more reliance was placed on the carried provisions. The types of fish caught also provide clues. Deep sea species indicate open ocean travel, while reef species suggest proximity to land. The fishermen on board would be specialists possessing not only the skills, but also the necessary rituals and respect for the ocean and its inhabitants. Fishing was often accompanied by chants and offerings, acknowledging the spiritual connection between humans and the creatures of the sea. There was no guarantee of success. Some days the ocean would be generous, other days frustratingly barren. But the presence of well-made hooks, strong lines, and skilled anglers provided a constant source of hope for fresh food. The sizzle of fish cooking over a small, carefully tended fire on the canoe more on fire later would have been a sound and smell to lift the spirits of everyone on board, a delicious reward from the vast blue pantry. Your magnificent wa'a is a masterpiece of engineering, but it's not indestructible. The relentless forces of the open ocean, powerful waves, strong winds, and the constant chafe of rigging take their toll. A broken mast, a snapped crossbeam, a major leak in one of the hulls, or even just significant wear and tear on the lashings could spell disaster miles from land. Therefore, an absolutely critical part of your packed inventory is a comprehensive repair kit consisting of essential tools and a generous supply of spare materials, particularly cordage. Keeping the canoe seaworthy is a constant, vital task. The star of your toolkit is the adze kowai in Hawaiian. This is the Polynesian equivalent of an axe hammer and chisel all rolled into one versatile tool. The adze head or blade was typically made from hard, fine-grained basalt, meticulously shaped and ground to a sharp cutting edge. This stone blade was then lashed securely to a wooden handle, often with a distinct elbow shape that provided leverage and control. Adzes came in various sizes, from large heavy ones used for rough shaping and felling trees, though you're not felling trees mid-ocean, hopefully, to smaller, finer ones used for more delicate carving and finishing work. On board the canoe, adzes would be indispensable for repairing or replacing damaged wooden components, shaping a new spar, smoothing a split plank, or even recarving a broken part of a hull if absolutely necessary. You'd probably have several adzes each with a specific purpose, carefully protected when not in use, as a chipped or broken adze blade was a serious loss. Alongside adzes, you might have smaller stone tools like chisels or gouges, also made from basalt or other hard stones, useful for more intricate woodworking repairs. Drill points made from sharp shell bone or stone would be used with a bow drill or a simple hand drill to create holes for lashing or pegging wooden components. These might be needed if a lashing point on a hull wears through and needs to be repositioned, or if a new piece of wood needs to be secured. Files or rasps made from rough coral shark skin or certain types of abrasive stone would be used for smoothing wood, sharpening tools, or shaping replacement parts. Shark skin in particular with its tiny sharp denticles, makes an excellent natural sandpaper. It's probably not something you'd want to accidentally sit on in your bark cloth mallow, but very handy for woodworking. Darling, have you seen my shark skin file? The port hull is feeling a bit rough. However, the most voluminous and arguably most critical part of your repair kit is cordage, and lots of it. As we've mentioned, Polynesian canoes were held together primarily by intricate lashings of sennit coconut husk fiber. Miles of this hand-braided rope were used in the original construction, securing the hulls to the crossbeams, the platform to the crossbeams, and the mast to the canoe. These lashings were designed to be strong, yet flexible, but they were also subject to constant wear from friction, salt water, and stress. Regular inspection and replacement of worn lashings were crucial for maintaining the canoe's structural integrity. Therefore, you'd be carrying huge coils of spare sennit cordage of various thicknesses. Running out of spare rope mid-ocean with a wobbly crossbeam would be a terrifying prospect. You can never have too much rope on a long sea voyage. It's the duct tape of the ancient Pacific. A mainstream historical fact is that the art of lashing, or aha, hoa, hono, was a highly specialized skill in Polynesia. Different types of lashings were used for different purposes, each with its own specific pattern and tensioning technique, designed to provide maximum strength and resilience. The knowledge of these lashings was passed down through generations of canoe builders and navigators. A well-lashed canoe was a safe canoe. One quirky, or perhaps just deeply practical aspect of canoe repair at sea would be the need for improvisation. You might not have the perfectly shaped piece of replacement wood you need. In such cases, the canoe builders and repairers would have to be incredibly resourceful, adapting available materials, perhaps even scavenging parts from less critical areas of the canoe if dire straits demanded it, or using pieces of driftwood if encountered. The ability to problem solve with limited resources was a key survival skill. Well, the spare spar snapped. Anyone got a particularly sturdy leg they're not using? Hopefully it wouldn't come to that. Historians still argue about the frequency and extent of major structural repairs undertaken at sea, while routine maintenance like retightening or replacing lashings would have been common. Could a major repair, like fixing a hole smashed in a hull by a rogue wave or a submerged reef, actually be accomplished in open ocean conditions? It would be an immense challenge requiring calm seas, exceptional skill, and probably a lot of desperate bailing. Some theories suggest that in cases of catastrophic damage far from land, the chances of successful repair and survival were slim, highlighting the navigator's incredible skill in avoiding such situations in the first place. You'd also carry materials for patching leaks, such as wads of coconut, husk fiber, dried leaves, or even specially prepared resins or gums that could be used to caulk small cracks or holes. A constant watch for leaks and swift action to address them would be part of the daily routine. The tools and spare materials for repair weren't just dead weight. They were an investment in survival. The rhythmic thud of an adze shaping a replacement part, or the sight of a crew member carefully relashing a stressed joint would be a reassuring sign that the canoe was being well maintained, its lifespan extended, its ability to carry you safely to your destination preserved. Every knot tied, every shaving of wood was an act of faith in the journey's continuation. So you have your study, your provisions, your precious water, your canoe, plants, your livestock, and your essential repair kit. But how on earth do you know where you're going? You're in the middle of the vast Pacific with no land in sight, often for weeks at a time. There's no GPS, no compass as we know it, no sextant. Your guidance system is far more ancient, intricate, and frankly, mind-bogglingly brilliant. It's the profound knowledge held by the master navigator, the Pidioewa or Palu, who uses a mental map and a deep understanding of the stars, sun, ocean, swells, winds, and wildlife to find tiny islands scattered across millions of square miles of ocean. The cornerstone of Polynesian navigation is star knowledge. The navigator has memorized the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars throughout the year. As the Earth rotates, stars appear to rise in the east and set in the west along specific paths. A particular star that rises at a known bearing can be used to hold a course. For example, if the navigator knows that his destination island lies in the direction where a specific star, let's call it Manu, rises at a certain time of year, he will steer the canoe towards Manu's rising point. As Manu climbs higher and other stars rise, he will switch to subsequent guiding stars that rise along the same bearing. This creates a star compass, a celestial guide laid out across the night sky. It's like having a cosmic connect the dots. But if you get it wrong, you don't just get a weird picture. You get very, very lost. The sun is also a critical guide. Its rising and setting points change throughout the year, but the navigator knows these shifts precisely. At midday, the sun's highest point can give an indication of latitude, particularly when combined with observations of stars that pass directly overhead at different latitudes. The glare of the sun on the water, the way its light reflects, can also provide subtle clues about direction and even the distant presence of land. Ocean swells are another vital tool. These are long, rolling waves generated by distant storms, often thousands of miles away. Unlike wind-driven chop, which is localized and changeable swells, travel in consistent directions for vast distances. The navigator learns to feel and interpret these swell patterns, often by lying down in the hull of the canoe to sense the subtle motions. A primary swell might be coming from one direction, but it can be refracted by distant islands, creating a bend in the pattern, or reflected, creating a counterswell. These subtle changes in the ocean's rhythm, imperceptible to an untrained person, can indicate the direction and sometimes even the distance of land. It's like reading the ocean's braille with the seat of your pants, or rather the hull of your canoe. Winds, of course, are also crucial. The navigator has an intimate knowledge of prevailing wind patterns for different seasons and regions of the ocean. The trade winds the doldrums. He knows how to use these winds to his advantage and how to deal with contrary winds. The feel of the wind on his skin, the sound it makes in the sails and rigging are all part of his sensory toolkit. A mainstream historical fact is that Polynesian navigators used sophisticated conceptual tools like star compasses, which divided the horizon into 32 or more points, each associated with the rising or setting point of a specific star. They also possessed mental maps of ocean routes, memorizing the sequence of guiding stars, prevailing swells, and estimated travel times between islands. This knowledge was passed down through rigorous oral training from master to apprentice over many years. It wasn't just about knowing facts. It was about embodying a deep, intuitive connection with the ocean environment. One quirky, or rather incredibly clever, navigational aid sometimes mentioned is the stick chart, particularly associated with the Marshall Islands in Micronesia. Though conceptually similar knowledge existed throughout Polynesia. These weren't taken on voyages but were used as training devices on land. They were abstract representations of ocean swell patterns around islands made from strips of coconut frond, midribs or pandanus root, with shells or coral pebbles marking island locations. They didn't show geographical positions in a cartographic sense, but rather the dynamics of the ocean, helping students visualize how swells interact with land. Imagine trying to teach someone advanced physics using only twigs and shells. That's the level of abstract genius we're talking about. Historians still argue about the precise methods and the level of accuracy Polynesian navigators could achieve, particularly regarding longitude, while latitude could be determined with reasonable accuracy from observing the zenith passage of stars and the sun's meridian altitude determining longitude without accurate timekeeping. Chronometers wouldn't be invented until the 18th century was a global challenge. Polynesian navigators likely relied on a form of dead reckoning, estimating speed and direction over time. Combined with their encyclopedic knowledge of swell patterns, bird migration routes, and other subtle signs that could indicate proximity to an island chain running north-south. The debate also continues over the extent to which voyages were one-way colonization trips versus two-way voyages with planned return journeys, which would require even more precise navigational skill. The navigator also watches for signs of land cloud formations that tend to gather over islands, the flight paths of land nesting birds, which fly out to feed in the morning and return in the evening, floating debris like driftwood or vegetation, and even changes in the color or smell of the water. These are all subtle clues that land might be near even when it's still below the horizon. This vast body of knowledge, this mental map of the ocean, is the navigator's most precious cargo. It's not written down. It lives in his mind, his senses, his very being. He is the eyes, ears, and brain of the voyage, guiding his people across the seemingly trackless ocean with a skill that borders on the uncanny. His calm confidence, born of deep knowledge and experience, is what keeps hope alive on the long, uncertain journey towards an unseen shore. Now that you're expertly navigating the vast Pacific guided by the stars and the wisdom of the PWO, let's consider your wardrobe. What exactly are you wearing on this multi-week ocean voyage? You can forget about Gore-Tex, jackets, thermal underwear, or even a natty sou'wester hat. Polynesian voyagers traveled light when it came to clothing, relying on practical minimalist garments made from natural materials, primarily bark cloth, and woven mats to protect them from the sun spray and occasional chill. The principal garment for men was the malo, a loincloth made from tapa cloth, bark cloth. Tapa, known as kapa in Hawaiian, is a remarkable non-woven fabric made from the inner bark of certain trees. Most commonly, the paper mulberry wake. The bark is stripped, soaked, and then beaten with wooden beaters, often intricately carved, to impart patterns into the finished cloth. This process felts and spreads the fibers, creating sheets of cloth that can be surprisingly soft and durable, or sometimes stiff and paper-like, depending on the preparation. The malo would be a long strip of this tapa wrapped around the waist and between the legs. It was simple, practical, and allowed for freedom of movement, essential for working on the canoe. You'd probably have a couple of spare malos, as they could get rather fragrant after a few weeks at sea with no laundry facilities. Anyone else think my malo is starting to smell like a fermented breadfruit that's been befriended by a seasick pig? Women typically wore a pau in Hawaiian, a skirt or sarong also made of tapa cloth wrapped around the waist and extending to the knees or ankles. Like the malo, it was a versatile and comfortable garment. Tapa could be plain or dyed with natural pigments from plants and earths, and sometimes decorated with stamped or painted designs, though everyday work garments were likely plainer than ceremonial ones. For protection against the sun rain or cooler temperatures, a kipa might be worn. This was a larger rectangular piece of tapa cloth that could be draped over the shoulders like a shawl or cloak, or even used as a light blanket. In rough weather, getting soaked with cold ocean spray was a constant risk, and a layer of tapa, even if damp, would offer some insulation. It wouldn't be waterproof in a modern sense, but it was better than nothing. Tapa also has the advantage of drying relatively quickly in the sun. Woven mats primarily made from the leaves of the pandanus tree. Lauhala also played a role in attire and comfort. While more commonly used for sails, floor coverings, and baskets, finely woven pandanus mats could be used as sleeping mats, providing some cushioning and insulation on the wooden deck of the canoe. In some regions, capes or cloaks were also woven from plant fibers like pandanus or flax in Aotearoa. The harakeke flax was crucial for weaving garments. These woven items were often more durable and resistant to wear and tear than tapa. You might have a personal sleeping mat, carefully rolled and stowed, your little patch of comfort in the vastness. A mainstream historical fact is that the production of tapa cloth was a highly skilled and labor-intensive art form, primarily undertaken by women in Polynesian societies. The quality of tapa, its softness, patterning, and even its scent, sometimes infused with fragrant plants, was a mark of status and craftsmanship. While voyaging attire was likely utilitarian, the knowledge of tapa making was a vital piece of cultural technology transported with the voyages. Footwear was generally not worn. Polynesians were accustomed to going barefoot, and on the deck of a canoe, bare feet would offer better grip and a more sensitive feel for the vessel's movement. However, in some cooler regions like Aotearoa, sandals or foot coverings made from woven flax or other fibers were sometimes used, particularly for overland travel, though probably not standard issue on a canoe. Headwear, if any, might consist of a simple circlet of leaves or woven fibers to keep hair out of the eyes, or perhaps a temporary covering made from a broad leaf if the sun was particularly intense. There wasn't a tradition of elaborate hats for everyday wear at sea, though ceremonial headdresses were significant on land. You're relying more on your natural ability to squint and a good sense of when to find shade under the canoe's shelter. One quirky, or perhaps just very sensible aspect of ocean attire would be the frequent lack of it, especially for men engaged in strenuous activities like paddling or fishing or when swimming in the warm tropical climate, and to avoid chafing from salt-encrusted damp tapa going without a malo might have been common and practical when privacy allowed or necessity demanded. Comfort and practicality often trumped modesty, especially on a long, isolated voyage where everyone was in the same boat quite literally. Is it just me, or is this salty malo giving me a rash in places I didn't know I had? Historians still argue about the specific variations in clothing across different Polynesian island groups and how these styles might have adapted during long voyages. For instance, did voyagers heading towards cooler climates like Aotearoa pack or manufacture heavier, more insulating garments en route or adapt more fully upon arrival? The archaeological record for textiles is sparse, as organic materials rarely survive for long periods. So much of our understanding comes from early European accounts and oral traditions. The clothing packed was minimal functional and entirely derived from the natural environment. It reflected a deep understanding of plant resources and a life lived in close harmony with the elements. Your tapamalo or pau might not be designer wear, but it's perfectly suited to the demands of an ocean voyage, a simple, effective shield against the sun and spray, allowing you to focus on the more pressing matters of sailing, fishing, and not accidentally discovering that icy continent we talked about. While the practicalities of food, water, tools, and clothing are paramount for physical survival, Polynesian voyages were also deeply spiritual undertakings. The vast ocean was not just a physical space, but a realm imbued with powerful forces, deities, and ancestral spirits. Therefore, an essential, if less tangible part of what you packed was sacred cargo. Items and practices intended to invoke protection, ensure good fortune, and maintain a harmonious relationship with the spiritual world. This was your metaphysical toolkit for navigating the perils of the deep. The navigator, PWO or Palu himself, was often a priest or a figure of significant spiritual authority. His knowledge was not just technical, but also sacred, passed down through generations and often involving rigorous initiation rites. He would carry specific personal items imbued with mana, spiritual power, or efficacy. These might include special stones-carved figures or implements used in divination or rituals related to wayfinding. These weren't just good luck charms. They were seen as conduits for ancestral guidance and divine assistance. You wouldn't dare touch the navigator's sacred bundle without permission. It would be like unplugging the GPS and offending a deity at the same time. Not a good move. Small carved representations of deities or ancestral spirits key in Hawaiian tiki elsewhere might be brought on board. These figures, often made from wood or stone, were not worshipped as idols in a Western sense, but rather served as focal points for prayer and ritual tangible connections to the protective forces of the unseen world. They might be placed in a revered spot on the canoe, perhaps within the sheltered hut, and offerings of food or chants would be made to them regularly. Think of them as spiritual antennae, helping to tune into the good vibes of the cosmos. Specific rituals and chants, mele or karakia, were integral to the voyage. These would be performed at departure at significant junctures during the journey, like crossing certain celestial landmarks or encountering specific weather phenomena, and upon sighting land, these chants might recount creation myths, invoke the names of powerful ancestors and gods, like Kanaloa Tangaroa, the god of the ocean, or Lonorongo, associated with peace agriculture and sometimes storms. The rhythmic chanting, often accompanied by specific gestures, was believed to placate potentially hostile spirits, attract favorable winds, and guide the canoe safely. It was a way of actively engaging with the spiritual landscape of the ocean. Amulets or talismans made from special shell's teeth, perhaps from a revered ancestor or a powerful animal, like a shark bone or certain types of wood, might be worn by the crew members for personal protection. These items, often passed down through families, were believed to possess protective mana. It's like having a tiny, very personal spiritual bodyguard. A mainstream historical fact is that Polynesian cosmology was rich and complex, with a pantheon of gods and a deep reverence for ancestors. The ocean was a particularly potent spiritual realm, home to both benevolent and malevolent entities. Successful navigation and settlement required not just technical skill, but also maintaining pono, a state of balance, harmony, and righteousness with the spiritual world. Any transgression or lack of respect could bring misfortune. One quirky, or rather deeply symbolic aspect of this spiritual cargo was the potential carrying of sacred stones from the home island's heiau or mare, sacred ceremonial platforms. These stones, imbued with the mana of the ancestral land, would be used to consecrate a new heiau or mare on the discovered island, thus establishing a spiritual connection between the old home and the new. It was a way of transplanting not just people and plants, but the very spiritual essence of their homeland. Imagine carefully wrapping a particularly holy-looking rock and giving it a prime spot on the canoe. This is our starter stone for good vibes in the new place. Historians still argue about the specific details and variations of these spiritual practices across the vast Polynesian triangle. While core beliefs about mana, ancestral spirits, and major deities were widespread, the specific rituals, chants, and the forms of sacred objects likely differed from island group to island group, and even from one lineage to another. Reconstructing these ancient belief systems relies on a combination of archaeology, examining marae, structures, and recovered artifacts, early European accounts often filtered through a missionary lens, and crucially, the living oral traditions and cultural practices that have been revived and maintained in many parts of Polynesia. The navigator might also practice forms of divination, perhaps by observing the patterns of clouds, the behavior of birds or fish, or even by interpreting dreams to gain insight into the voyage's progress and potential dangers. These practices were part of his sacred toolkit, helping him make critical decisions. This spiritual dimension of the voyage was not separate from the practical. It was interwoven with every aspect of life on the canoe. The building of the canoe itself would have involved sacred rituals. The planting of crops, the catching of fish, the rationing of water, all could be imbued with spiritual significance. It was a holistic worldview where the physical and metaphysical were inextricably linked. For you as a voyager, these practices provide comfort, reassurance, and a sense of order in the face of the vast, unpredictable ocean. They remind you that you are not alone, but part of a lineage guided by your ancestors and protected by your gods as you sail towards an unknown destiny. The chants are as vital as the sails, the mana, as important as the mast. While the spiritual well-being of the voyagers was tended to with sacred cargo and rituals, their physical health was also a major concern on these long, arduous journeys. Illness or injury at sea, far from the resources of land, could quickly become life-threatening. Therefore, another essential component of what Polynesian navigators packed was a kind of floating pharmacy, a collection of medicinal plants and the deep knowledge of how to use them to treat common ailments and injuries encountered on the Wā-e-a. The Polynesian pharmacopoeia was extensive based on centuries of observing the healing properties of the local flora. The kahuna la'au lapa'au in Hawaiian, a traditional herbalist or medical expert or someone with equivalent knowledge, would be a vital member of the expedition, or the navigator himself might possess this expertise. They would bring along dried herbs, roots, barks and leaves, as well as live plants. Some of the canoe plants had dual food, medicinal uses specifically for their healing properties. Common ailments at sea would include seasickness, which, while not usually fatal, could be debilitating. Certain plants might have been used to try and alleviate nausea, perhaps ginger-like roots or aromatic leaves. Dehydration, as we've discussed, was a constant threat, and while fresh water was the primary solution, certain plant infusions might have been used to help rehydrate or soothe an ailing person. Sunburn and exposure were also significant issues. The sap or leaves of certain plants, like aloe-like succulents, if available and transportable, or the noni fruit, might have been used topically to soothe burned or irritated skin. Remember our jokes about crocodile dung sunscreen. The Polynesians had much more sensible and frankly less repulsive botanical solutions for skin care. Infections from cuts and abrasions were a serious danger in the unhygienic conditions of a long canoe voyage. Salt water itself has some antiseptic properties, but plant-based poultices and washes would have been crucial for preventing and treating infections. Plants with known antibacterial or anti-inflammatory properties, such as turmeric, olena, noni morinda, citrifolia, or certain types of ferns, would be invaluable. The leaves of the tizis plant, besides their other uses, were sometimes used as a clean dressing for wounds. Digestive upsets from spoiled food or unfamiliar water sources encountered if they made landfall on uninhabited islets would also need treatment. Astringent barks or roots might be used to treat diarrhea, while other plants could help with constipation or indigestion. It's all about keeping the internal plumbing running as smoothly as possible when you're hundreds of miles from the nearest, well, anything. Pain relief from injuries, sprains, or even just the aches and pains of cramped conditions and hard labor would be sought from various plant preparations. Some plants might have been used as analgesics or muscle relaxants, perhaps, applied as a poultice or consumed as an infusion. A mainstream historical fact is that traditional Polynesian medicine was a holistic system, often integrating physical treatments with spiritual incantations or rituals, ho'oponopono, for resolving interpersonal conflicts that could manifest as illness, for example. The healer would address not just the symptoms, but also the perceived spiritual or emotional imbalances that might be contributing to the illness. So, the island pharmacy wasn't just about herbs. It was about a whole approach to well-being. One quirky, or rather resourceful medical practice might have involved using heated stones for therapeutic warmth or to help prepare poultices. Small, smooth stones could be heated in the canoe's carefully tended fire pit, more on that soon, and then wrapped in leaves or tapa cloth to apply to sore muscles or to keep an ailing person warm. It's like an ancient hot water bottle, but with more of a "don't drop it on the canoe and set everything on fire" vibe. Historians still argue about the specific efficacy of all traditional plant medicines, as rigorous scientific testing in the modern sense is often lacking for historical practices. However, many plants used in traditional Polynesian medicine have since been found to contain active biochemical compounds with demonstrable therapeutic effects. The knowledge was empirical, built up over generations of trial, error, and careful observation. They knew what worked even if they didn't know the precise chemical pathways. The preparation of these medicines at sea would require skill and the right tools. A stone pounder or mortar and pestle might be carried for crushing herbs. Fresh water, already precious, would be needed for making infusions or decoctions. The healer would carefully measure and mix ingredients, perhaps chanting specific incantations as they worked, imbuing the medicine with both physical and spiritual potency. This island pharmacy was a testament to the profound botanical knowledge of Polynesian peoples. They understood that the plants around them offered not just food and materials, but also the means to heal and sustain health. Carrying this knowledge and the plants themselves across the ocean was as vital as carrying seeds for food crops. It ensured that when they reached a new land, they had the means to care for their sick and injured, a crucial element for the long-term survival and success of the new colony. The scent of crushed herbs, a symbol of healing, would be another thread of familiarity and hope woven into the fabric of the voyage. In the vastness of the Pacific, surrounded by water, one of the most precious and challenging things to maintain on your wa'a is fire. Fire means cooked food, which is not only more palatable and easier to digest, but also safer, killing potential parasites or bacteria in fresh fish or meat. Fire provides warmth on cold nights or during storms. It can be used to heat stones for medicinal purposes or to signal other canoes if traveling in a fleet, or even as a beacon if land is near. But how do you carry and preserve this vital element on a wooden canoe constantly splashed by waves and exposed to wind and rain? The primary method for carrying fire was not necessarily as a continuously burning flame, which would be incredibly risky and difficult to maintain. Instead, Polynesian voyagers often carry embers, smoldering logs, or specially prepared fire sticks that could be coaxed back to life when needed. A section of slow-burning hardwood, perhaps from a tree known for its ability to smolder for long periods, would be carefully tended. This might be kept in a fire-resistant container, perhaps a large, thick-shelled coconut, a section of bamboo sealed at one end, or even a specially constructed clay-lined hearth or fire pit on the canoe deck. This smoldering ember would be the mother fire, the seed from which new flames could be kindled. It required constant attention, shielded from wind and water, and periodically fed with small amounts of dry tinder. Someone would be assigned the critical role of firekeeper, a job demanding vigilance and skill. It's like being in charge of a very temperamental, very smoky Tamagotchi. If the mother fire went out, or if starting a new fire was necessary, Polynesian voyagers were masters of friction-based fire-making. The most common method was the fire plow. This involved rubbing a pointed stick of hard wood, the plow or aulama, vigorously along a groove in a larger, softer piece of wood, the hearth or aunaki. The friction generated fine wood dust, which would heat up and eventually ignite into a glowing ember. This ember would then be carefully transferred to a small bundle of tinder, dry coconut husk, fibers, shredded tapa cloth or dried leaves, and gently blown into a flame. This process requires considerable skill, strength, and the right materials. It's not as easy as flicking a big lighter. You'd probably work up quite a sweat and possibly a few blisters before you got your flame. Another method less common in Polynesia, but known in some parts of the Pacific, was the fire drill, where a stick is spun rapidly in a hole in another piece of wood. Regardless of the specific technique, having dry, high-quality fire-making woods was essential. These would be carefully selected before the voyage and stored in a dry place on the canoe. A mainstream historical fact is that the ability to make and control fire was a fundamental technology that allowed humans to expand into diverse environments worldwide, and it was no less crucial for oceanic voyages. The knowledge of which woods were best for fire making and the techniques for efficiently generating flame were vital cultural assets. The fire pit or hearth on the canoe would be a carefully constructed affair. It might be a shallow wooden box filled with sand or stones to insulate the deck from the heat, or a more permanent structure lined with clay, if available. It needed to be stable and shielded from the wind as much as possible. Cooking would be done over this small contained fire, perhaps roasting fish on skewers or heating food wrapped in leaves. The amount of firewood carried would be limited by space and weight, so fuel efficiency was key. Dried coconut husks, driftwood encountered at sea, or even dried animal dung, if you were really desperate for fuel, might be used. One quirky, or perhaps just very practical aspect of fire on a canoe would be smoke management. On a relatively small open vessel, a constantly smoking fire could be unpleasant for the crew, irritating eyes and lungs. The firekeeper would need to manage the burn carefully, using dry fuel to minimize smoke and positioning the hearth to take advantage of prevailing breezes to carry the smoke away from the main living and working areas. It's a delicate balance between needing the fire and not wanting to be constantly fumigated. Historians still argue about the extent to which fires were kept burning continuously versus being rekindled daily or as needed. Continuous burning offered convenience but posed a higher risk and consumed more fuel. Rekindling saved fuel but required effort and reliable fire-making tools. The practice likely varied depending on weather conditions, fuel availability, and the specific traditions of the voyaging group. Perhaps on calm, dry days, a small fire was maintained, while during storms or rough weather, it was extinguished and rekindled later. The presence of fire on board also had symbolic significance. Fire is often associated with life, community, and civilization. A hearth, even a tiny, precarious one, on a canoe deck represented a focal point, a home, in the vast wilderness of the ocean. The flickering light of a small fire at night would have been a comforting sight, a small beacon of human presence in the immense darkness. The responsibility of the firekeeper was immense. Allowing the mother fire to die through neglect or losing the ability to make fire would have serious consequences for the health, nutrition, and morale of everyone on board. The gentle glow of the embers, carefully nurtured, was a spark of hope, a promise of warmth and sustenance carried diligently across the endless waves. It was the heart of the voyage in more ways than one. Beyond the essential supplies for survival, food, water, tools, plants, and animals, what about items of a more personal nature? Did Polynesian voyagers pack any small comforts items for trade, or things that simply connected them to their identity and culture on a more individual level, while space on the wharf was at an absolute premium and every item had to justify its inclusion? It's likely that some small precious personal or tradable goods made the journey. Personal adornments, though perhaps not worn extensively during the rigors of the voyage itself, might have been carefully packed. These could include items like necklaces or pendants made from shell bone. Teeth, shark teeth, were particularly prized for their association with strength and spiritual power, or polished stones. Such items often held deep personal or ancestral significance, serving as amulets or reminders of lineage and identity. Imagine a young voyager carefully wrapping a small whale-tooth pendant, Leinihu Palawa in Hawaiian, a mark of chiefly status passed down from a grandparent, a tangible link to the family and heritage left behind. These weren't just pretty baubles. They were imbued with mana and story, small, finely crafted tools or implements that also served an ornamental purpose might have been carried. A beautifully carved fish hook too precious to risk in everyday fishing, or a small polished adze blade that was a family heirloom. These items combined utility with artistry and personal value. Given the Polynesian skill in weaving and tapa making, it's possible that small, exceptionally fine pieces of tapa cloth, perhaps with intricate designs or special dyes, were carried. These might be intended as high-status gifts if the voyagers encountered other peoples, or simply as treasured personal possessions. A particularly soft or beautifully patterned piece of tapa could offer a small touch of comfort or beauty in the otherwise stark environment of the canoe. Items for trade, though perhaps not the primary motivation for all voyages, could also have been part of the cargo, especially on journeys between known island groups. These would need to be items that were valuable, portable, and perhaps scarce in the destination islands. Fine-grained basalt for adze making was a highly valued commodity, and if your home island had a good quarry, you might carry pre-formed adze blanks for trade. Brightly colored feathers from specific birds used for making ceremonial cloaks and headdresses were also valuable trade items in many parts of Polynesia. Certain types of shells, particularly those used for making fish hooks or ornaments, could also be traded. It's like an ancient form of currency, where your wealth is measured in bird feathers and nicely shaped rocks. I'll trade you 3 red parrot feathers for that excellent adze blank, and maybe throw in a slightly used malo, a mainstream historical fact is that extensive trade networks existed between various Polynesian island groups long before European contact. Goods knowledge and even people moved between islands, facilitated by sophisticated voyaging technology and navigational skills. This inter-island exchange played a crucial role in the social, economic, and genetic makeup of Polynesian societies. One quirky, or perhaps just very human type of personal treasure that might have been carried, though leaving little archaeological trace, would be musical instruments. Small portable instruments like nose flutes or hehano ihu in Hawaiian, bamboo mouth harps or gourd whistles could provide entertainment and a means of cultural expression during long evenings on the canoe or upon arrival at a new land. The haunting gentle melodies of a nose flute drifting across the quiet ocean at dusk would be a poignant reminder of home and a soothing sound in the vast silence. It's the ancient equivalent of your travel playlist, but much more skill-intensive to operate. Historians still argue about the extent and nature of personal baggage on these voyages. Given the extreme constraints of space and weight and the focus on communal survival, individual possessions would have been kept to an absolute minimum. The emphasis was likely on items that had a dual, practical, spiritual purpose or significant social value. It wasn't like packing for a holiday where you throw in a few extra outfits and a good book. Every single item had to earn its place on that canoe. Perhaps the most important personal treasures were intangible. The songs, stories, genealogies, mooku auhau, and chants memorized by the voyagers. This vast body of oral literature was the library, the history book, and the cultural DNA of the people carried in their minds and hearts. It connected them to their ancestors, explained their place in the cosmos, and provided the framework for their society. These were the treasures that would be unpacked and shared in the new land, ensuring the continuity of their culture. So while your wa'a might not be laden with chests of personal belongings, the few carefully chosen items, whether a polished shell necklace, a prized adze, or a small gourd flute, along with the immeasurable wealth of cultural knowledge, represent the human desire for beauty, identity, and connection even in the most challenging circumstances. These small comforts and precious heirlooms are whispers of individual lives woven into the grand tapestry of the great Polynesian migration. We've meticulously unpacked your wa, examining the provisions, the tools, the canoe plants, the livestock, the sacred items, and even the few personal treasures. But perhaps the most profound cargo, the one that takes up no physical space yet weighs the most in terms of significance, is the intangible baggage carried within the voyagers themselves, their courage, their knowledge, their lineage, and their unwavering hope for a future on a new horizon. The sheer courage required to embark on one of these voyages is difficult to comprehend from our modern perspective. You're sailing into the unknown, often with no guarantee of finding land, facing the perils of the open ocean in a vessel made of wood and fiber. Storms, starvation, dehydration, getting lost. These are not abstract fears, but ever-present possibilities. To leave the familiar shores of your home island, your family, your established life, and to venture out into the vast, seemingly empty expanse of the Pacific requires a level of bravery and resolve that is truly awe-inspiring. This courage isn't a packed item. It's a fundamental quality of the people undertaking the journey. It's the silent, steady thrum beneath the creak of the canoe and the whisper of the wind. Then there is the immense body of knowledge carried by the navigator and the crew. We've touched upon the navigator's mental maps of stars and swells, but also consider the broader ecological knowledge, which fish are edible, which are poisonous, how to find water on uninhabited islands, which plants can be used for medicine or food, how to build shelters, how to manage resources sustainably. This is generations of accumulated wisdom passed down, orally essential for survival, both during the voyage and upon arrival at a new land. This knowledge is a living library more precious than any written scroll. It's the software that runs the entire operation. Without it, all the hardware, the canoe, the tools, is useless. Each voyager also carries their lineage, their mo'oku auhau. They are not just individuals. They are links in a chain stretching back to their ancestors and forward to their descendants. They carry the stories of their origins, the deeds of their forebears, and the responsibility to continue their family line in a new place. This sense of ancestral connection provides strength, identity, and a profound sense of purpose. You're not sailing for yourself alone, but for all those who came before you and all those who will come after. It's a heavy responsibility, but also a powerful motivator. Your ancestors are, in a way, sailing with you, their presence felt in the chants, the stories, and the very blood that flows in your veins. And of course, there is hope. Hope for a better life, for new opportunities, for fertile lands and abundant resources. Hope that the navigator's skills will be true, that the gods will be kind, that the canoe will hold strong. Hope is the invisible sail that pulls you forward, even when doubts creep in and the horizon remains stubbornly empty. It's the belief that beyond the endless ocean there is a place waiting, a place where your people can thrive. This hope is woven into the fabric of every lashing, every paddle stroke, every prayer whispered to the wind. Without hope, such an audacious undertaking would be impossible. It's the fuel that keeps the human spirit going when all other resources are dwindling. A mainstream historical fact is that the Polynesian settlement of the Pacific, covering an area larger than any other single cultural expansion in human history before the European age of discovery, was a deliberate, planned, and remarkably successful endeavor. This success was built not just on incredible seafaring technology, but on the intangible qualities of the people themselves, their resilience, their adaptability, their deep cultural knowledge, and their enduring spirit of exploration. One quirky, or perhaps profoundly insightful aspect of this intangible baggage is the Polynesian concept of aloha, or its cognates, across different islands. While often translated simply as love or hello, goodbye, it encompasses a much deeper sense of compassion, empathy, respect, and interconnectedness. This spirit of aloha, of mutual support and cooperation, would have been absolutely essential for survival in the close confines of a voyaging canoe, and for establishing a new community in an unknown land. You can't afford petty squabbles or selfishness when your lives depend on each other. The ability to live in harmony, to share resources, to work together towards a common goal. This was perhaps the most vital social technology they carried. Historians still argue about the precise motivations that drove individuals and groups to undertake these perilous voyages. Was it primarily push factors, overpopulation, conflict, resource, scarcity, or pull factors, the lure of adventure, the promise of new lands, trade opportunities? The truth is likely a complex mix, but underlying all of it must have been a powerful sense of agency and a belief in the possibility of creating a new future. They weren't just passive victims of circumstance. They were active agents shaping their own destinies, carrying their entire world, both tangible and intangible, across the sea. So, as you gaze out at the starlit ocean from the deck of your wire, remember that the most important things you've packed cannot be seen or touched. They are the courage in your heart, the knowledge in your mind, the lineage that defines you, and the unquenchable hope that guides you towards that distant, unseen shore. These are the true treasures of the Polynesian voyagers, the enduring legacy of their incredible journeys. The gentle rocking of the wah becomes a soothing cradle. Now the vast Pacific, a dark, tranquil blanket under a canopy of brilliant stars. The calls of the seabirds have faded with the daylight, and a profound quiet settles over the ocean, broken only by the soft creak of the canoe's timbers and the whisper of water against the hulls. The navigator, a silent, steadfast presence, continues his vigil, his gaze fixed on the celestial guides that have led his people across these waters for generations. The concerns of the day, the rationing of water, the mending of a fishing line, the tending of a precious plant, all dissolve into the peaceful rhythm of the night sea. There is a deep sense of trust here in the skill of the navigator, in the strength of the canoe, in the wisdom of the ancestors, and in the promise of the journey. The immense ocean, once a source of apprehension, now feels like a protective embrace, holding you safe as you drift towards dreams of verdant islands and new beginnings. Let the steady, ancient rhythm of the swells carry you a gentle, timeless lullaby, deeper and deeper into a serene and restorative sleep.